Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to the NRW. I'm your host today, Robin Dina, and I thank you all very much for joining me here today because today I'm going to be reviewing the movie The Retaliators. I remember hearing about this movie a while back. I think sometime in the summer, if I recall correctly, but I don't remember what it was that I never that maybe not followed through with to look into the film here. But it wasn't until our very own Kuya P had actually spoke with the writers of the film and the producers of the movies and the Gear Brothers, which is available right now on the channel. If you have not checked out that interview, I do highly recommend you guys do check it out. And I'll make sure the icon for you guys to click on to look into that because it's a really well in-depth conversation that Kuya P and the writers had about the filmmaking process and what also was more or less the inspiration to writing this film as well too. But here's what I want to kind of just highlight real quick about that conversation because like I said before, I remember hearing about the movie, but I don't remember what the plot synopsis was about. But I think I vaguely remember hearing that it was based on it was loosely based on or loosely inspired by a real life event that dealt with the writers of the movie. I think I remember that to some degree. But in listening to the conversation that the Gear Brothers had with Kuya P, they had shared that well over a decade ago that their sister had been raped and that what the family had gone through as a result of that, and it took over 10 years for them to finally catch the suspect and then bring him to justice. But in that process along the way, there was an idea that one of the brothers had about if they just had 1 minute with the guy, what they would do, and that kind of more or less was sort of like the catalyst of them getting to writing out the story along the way. And then the other thing they pointed out too about their sister was that, throughout this whole process, everyone was looking out for each other to support each other along the way, but their sister had really learned to basically had become a lot stronger along the way throughout these years, where she is someone who's very adamant about sharing her story to help other people who have gone through what she has gone through and be able to find the tools to be able to deal with these problems that she had gone through as well too, along with her family members that are also dealing with this too, as well. So in listening to that story, I thought that was really interesting for me to listen to how this all came to be, because one thing that the brothers had also pointed out too is that there was a concern that with the direction of the story they wanted to take, if their sister would be okay with it. And she was very much all for it. And she told them pretty much to do it as whatever you want, so long as the story gets out there and we can talk about this here and hopefully help some people out along the way. That's what she was really all about here, and also in making a great movie as well too. So there was just so many little finer details that I took away from listening to that conversation that really kept me in tune about what to look out for in the film when I finally came across watching it, because this movie actually came out back on October 21st, so a few weeks ago as this recording, and I can truthfully say that I really did enjoy the film. I didn't love the movie, but I really did have a lot of fun with the film. And I'm also going to point out too right now that there are going to be some parts of the review that I'll be getting into some spoilers here. I won't necessarily reveal when I'm going to get into spoilers, because I'm warning you guys right now. If you haven't seen the movie and don't want to be spoiled at all whatsoever, then I recommend you guys pause the video right now. You can check it out, where you can rent it and buy it on Amazon or wherever VOD is available, and then come on back to this review and hear the rest of my thoughts I meant to say. So I'll get into a bit of a synopsis here, a little bit of spoilers, my positives, my negatives, and then my rating. An upstanding pastor uncovers a dark and twisted underworld as he searches for answers surrounding his daughter's brutal murder. And that right there is the film in a nutshell. So now let's get into my positives. My first positive with the film actually has to do with the lead in the film, and Michael Lombardi, who plays the character of Bishop in this movie. One thing I want to point out about this film is that when I was listening to the conversation that Kuya P had with the Gear Brothers, to kind of make a long story short, the one thing that they were obviously looking for is finding an actor that can play the part of this character, and they end up working with Michael Lombardi, who was mostly known for the character that he played on the TV show Rescue Me, which the name of the character escapes me right now. But I have seen the show, and I really did enjoy it. But it's been such a long time since I've seen it that some details that I forgot about that particular character, among other things as well too. But they did point out that in working with Michael Lombardi to partake in this film, they had no idea that their sister, who is also, well, at least now I believe they said she's a chief firefighter, if I recall correctly, who is one of the very few female chief firefighters in the nation right now. She loved that show. Like, that was like her favorite show, and she loved the character that Mike played on that show. In fact, a lot of firefighters really connected with that character because They all related to his story, what that you see throughout the season. And when they had told her that that Mike Lombardi is gonna be playing the lead in the role, like she was like amazed the fact that Mike Lombardi, the guy that played one of my favorite characters in the show that I absolutely love and adore, is going to play the lead in the film with my brothers that are writing this movie and producing it as well too. So a lot of things came in full circle for her in that respect, and it certainly gave an extra incentive for the brothers to make sure that this film does happen with him in the lead. And I'm so glad that it worked out that way, because here's the one thing about this particular character, about Bishop, that I really did appreciate a great deal, which is the fact that when you first meet the character, he is a pastor. He's someone who's very much a believer in God, and he actually really is a good guy. He comes across as a very good guy, and a lot of people in his town do respect him and love him as well too. And you get to see that he has a pretty good relationship with his daughters. I don't recall off the top of my head here whether or not if the mother's still around, but because I don't remember making any mention about that. But what I do appreciate about this character is that you get to see early on the type of person that he is, and he is a good guy. There's no bad bone in him at all whatsoever. But there comes a point in the movie, especially in the beginning of the film, where he has to confront people who are doing some pretty mean stuff. And then when he confronts them, you can clearly tell he's just trying to take the peaceful approach, basically turning the other cheek, because that's the way that the Bible teaches you to handle things. And you can see that people are just pretty much walking all over him and taking advantage of him in that thought process that he has about how to deal with these confrontational issues. And his daughter, his oldest one, is pretty much saying, why didn't you just fight the guy back? He's like, no, we don't do that. That's not the way to do it. God doesn't want that way, or something like to that effect, if I recall correctly. And she's clearly a little annoyed with that response. But in doing so, you start to realize that this is a man that is all about finding the peaceful way of resolving the issues without any sort of confrontational violence or physical altercation, whatever the case may be. So this is where the spoiler will probably come in here, where I can point out that when his daughter does get murdered by this man, when you see how that came to be, which I won't reveal there, but when she gets murdered, he's obviously very broken by all that, and to the point where he's isolating himself and he's praying and he's trying to find a resolution to this problem and figure out who had done this so that way he can be put to justice. The detective that's on the case tells him, hey, I found this guy, and I'm going to give you 1 minute to do whatever you want with him, so long as you don't kill him. And Mike takes up that chance, and then when he's about to go through with it, he opts not to actually do anything at all. In fact, he's like, just forget it. I don't want to do that. It's just not the way I want to do things anymore. So the detective is telling him, I can't let you do that. You have to do this. And if you don't do this, I can't trust that you're going to walk away and just keep it to yourself, because there's probably going to be a good chance that you're going to reveal everything that I've been doing here so far. Because then you come to find out that this detective actually goes after like the worst of the worst in people who have committed these horrible, horrible crimes, and the things that he's doing to them to pretty much literally break them, and to the point where they're not the same people anymore. They're almost like insane in a lot of ways, where a lot of people I think someone in the movie pointed them out as being zombies, because they are just rabid and very aggressive and vicious in a lot of ways, to the point where they're eating people and whatever else. So whatever he's been doing to them has literally broken them down to the point they're unrecognizable anymore. So once Bishop has seized that with this detective holding all these criminals in this quite literally a cage, he realizes that this is all fucked up. But along the way, you start to see that the peaceful path that he wants to take about confronting certain individuals, that's not going to work, especially under these circumstances, to the point where he accepts that I've got to do whatever it takes to survive. And then he goes about and does that along the way. And it's also interesting too for me to see that when he does eventually get to that point, and he does go after the man that does kill his daughter, which I thought was awesome, the way how that was handled, in my opinion. But you do get to see that a character arc and understand what led him to that point, and it all makes sense, and it is all valid as well too. One other thing too, I remember when I saw the trailer to this movie after the conversation that Kuyapi had with the Gear Brothers, is that this movie does have a lot of well-known metal and basically metal rock star musicians in this film. Jacoby Shaddix is in the movie. Tommy Lee, I meant to say, is in the film as well too for a brief second. And you also have Ivan Moody, among others, well-known musicians in the metal scene that have a pretty significant role in this movie in some way or shape or form. And quite frankly, I was a little concerned about that because I don't. These guys are not actors, and I was just wondering if they're going to be when they're going to be in the movie, in what capacity they're going to be used, and if they're going to be used effectively. Honestly, they were actually done. They were used quite well, and they actually did a really good job with the roles they were given to do a good job with their respective characters. And what I also did appreciate about the movie too, in that respect, is that they weren't distracting at all by any means. Where it was more like, "Hey, this is Tommy Lee, and I'm here in this." It wasn't like that at all. That's which is what I really did appreciate. It didn't take away from the movie, but it definitely did add on like a little bit of a wow factor, in my opinion. We're saying, okay, these guys have done a really good job with what they were given here to do the film justice in that degree, I would say. One of the positives I can also point out too is with the violence in this movie. So the Gear Brothers had pointed out that some people kind of get the impression this is more or less kind of like a death wish film, and it does have a bit of that kind of an influence on it, but it really isn't that type of film, because when you watch the movie, especially when you get later on to the third act, it becomes something completely different, where kind of like a left field in a lot of ways, where the violence just amps up even more. And I think it's fantastic. I love violence in movies, but I love violence in movies and revenge films, and this movie does a good job in just going all out with that. And I think that was one of the most fun factors for me about this movie, that I really did enjoy a great deal here. But as far as everything else is concerned that I can point out about the films, I mean, the detective in the movie, you get to learn about his background too, what led him to basically capture all these criminals who have done these horrible acts, because he does reveal what some of these guys have done, and what led him to do this here, and how he's been able to capture them all in this one facility without everyone ever finding out here, which I thought was quite interesting as well. So that you get a little bit of backstory with just about everybody here when it comes to the main characters that you're following here, to understand where they're coming from, how they ended up where they're at, and then what their overall story is by the end of the film. So I think in that respect, the movie does a good job in that aspect of here too. So that's going to be the end of my positives here. Now let's get into my negatives. One of my first major negatives that I had with the film, I remember, was more about see, the movie sits at 90 minutes long, and I'm sure a lot of it has to do with the scheduling they may have had to get the things that they needed and fill in that 90-minute time frame for what they wanted, or at least I believe what they intend on telling with the story here for that amount of time. But I do remember thinking that I would have liked certain set of details fleshed out a little bit more, because the one thing about this movie that I think worked really well is that you do get time to spend with the characters, in this case with Bishop and then the detective, and certain other characters along the way as well. And the core characters you're following in this movie, you get a bit of a backstory about them, where you understand what the purpose of them in the story. And I think that movie does a good job in establishing that. At certain points, though, I did feel like certain story beats didn't really meet to its full potential. I felt like there are certain things that were leading up to something good and then never actually went there, or if it did go there, but it just didn't do it in a way that I thought was very fulfilling to get a deeper understanding of the overall character arcs of the story that we're following in certain scenarios here and there. So I always felt like that was something that was kind of lacking in that degree. It wasn't terrible. I'm not saying the story was terrible by any means. It's not that. It was just that I felt like their story was going somewhere in certain respects, and it did go there. Some of this felt a little flat for me. Some of it excelled in certain areas, but I felt like in that capacity, that's where most of the negatives in that sense was outweighing the positives. Because although you do get a great character arc in Bishop, played by Mike Lombardi, in this movie, which I thought was very satisfying, and then you also get a bit of I wouldn't say a character arc with the detective, but you do see what happens to him and understand that this is a path that he had chosen, more like that these were going to be the consequences of the said path that he took there. And then when it came to the man that killed Bishop's daughter, there was this is kind of a spoiler here, but he was on that breaking point where he was going to die, and then when he somehow managed to escape, I would have liked to see a little bit more of that character. I wouldn't say fleshed out a little bit more, but just kind of fill in those gaps about how this all came to be for him to be able to escape almost I wouldn't say unscathed, but just mostly intact, I would say, because there was something interesting about that particular character that I felt like if we got more of that character, even though the payoff, I thought when you see him die at the end of the movie, which I thought was awesome, but it wasn't, I wouldn't say like I was fully satisfied with it. I just thought it was awesome to see him die the way that he did, but not in the sense of like, I think, what's the best way I can describe it? That the bad guy got what he deserved. I mean, I was happy he got what he deserved, but I think the way that it built up to that for that character, it was almost a little flat for me. I hope that makes sense what I'm trying to explain here, because that character I thought had a lot going for him, and I really would like to see a little more. So that, like in the same way that we got with Bishop and to some degree the detective as well too, to really get a full understanding that when you got to know the guy on face value, he's just this evil person in a lot of ways. But I wanted to get to know more of the character, learn more. That's the best way I can hopefully describe it for you to understand what I mean by that here. One other thing I can also point out too that I felt like was a little, I wouldn't say disappointing, but I felt like certain parts of the editing when it came to certain acting sequences didn't work as well for me. I mean, there were some parts where you can see that the knives are being thrusted into someone, and someone's throat's being cut off, and the head's being chopped off, or legs being sliced off. Like, all that stuff was actually quite good. It was just certain parts during those altercations that occurred where I felt like some parts of the editing it wasn't up to par, where in other parts they were just beautifully done. So I think there was a little bit of inconsistency in that to some degree that worked well for me, and some areas didn't work as well for me. Mostly it didn't work very well at all, I would say. But when it worked great. But when it didn't work, it was very noticeable for me, and it stuck out to me, to be frank with you, and kind of like a sore thumb in a lot of ways. But otherwise, I mean, that's what I can think of right now as far as my negatives concerned. So now let's get into my rating. So like I said, I really did enjoy this movie. I didn't love the film, but I really did like it a lot, because I think the things that I liked about the film a great deal was the fact that the revenge aspect of the story was quite good when it led up to what looked like to be a revenge film. Then it wasn't, and then it became more of a story about survival. So there was a bit of shift in direction about what the story looks like to be about, and then what it actually turned out to be. And I really did like the fact that we get the time to spend with the character of Bishop to really see his journey and see how it formed him to be the man that he is. And quite frankly, I really wish there was one thing I meant to point out, the negatives here, was that because he's a man of God and he had killed all these people to survive, which was justified in my opinion, but how he's learned to deal with that after going through with that and killing people on the way, and still be in good terms with himself, in this case with God as well too, because he's still a pastor even after all that, and he's preaching and the word of God and whatever else. Like, I actually would have liked to see a little bit of that aspect of the character and how he comes to terms with that, for him to also deal with that turmoil that he went through as well too. So I would have liked to see a bit of that as well. So, but overall though, the enjoyment factor of this film is up there for me. This is a film that I actually would go back and watch. And honestly, if this movie were ever to come out on Blu-ray, I would buy this film as well too, because there's a lot of great quality this movie does have that I really did enjoy. But I always felt like the negatives are creeping up there when it comes to the positives. But the positives, in my opinion, certainly do outweigh the negatives by a good bit here, in my opinion. So for me, I would give this movie a raise a glass. And those are my thoughts on the film. And if you have seen this movie, I would love to hear your thoughts in the comment section down below. And as I mentioned before, you can rent and buy the movie. You can rent it on Amazon. I think you can also check it out on Vudu as well too. So I'll make sure I have the link in the description down below where you guys can do so. I do highly recommend you guys check it out, especially if you're a big fan of the revenge thriller genre, because this is a film that I think does a really good job in satisfying fans of like myself that love that genre, especially when it comes to like the violence that comes with those type of films. This movie does certainly satisfy that, in my opinion, when it comes to that aspect of the storytelling here too. So I do recommend you a great deal. You guys do check it out. And also, if you haven't done so already, subscribe to the NRW. Make sure you share, like, a video, hit the notification bell while you're down there. And also follow NRW on social media, on Instagram, New Release Wednesdays, on Facebook, Nerds Rule the World, and on Twitter at the NRW. And you can follow me on my social media accounts on Instagram and Twitter, Mr. Rob and Dina, and on Facebook, simply just Rob and Dina. And I have a show on the channel called You're So Cool with Rob and Dina, and I have social media for the show as well. On Instagram, You're So Cool with Rob and Dina, and on Twitter, You're So Cool WRM. And until next time, everybody, hope you guys enjoyed this review. Stay safe out there, and cheers.